everybody. This is our very first Chief of Staff webinar ever. Casey Wright is going to be your host. My name is Kendall Jackson. I'm going to be moderating this webinar today. I'm the marketing specialist here at Chief of Staff Kansas City, and today you're going to learn the most out of how to build your networking relationships, expand your network, and Casey's top secret tips on everything networking. So just a few housekeeping things. Today is going to be recorded, this webinar, and you'll be able to share it out with people after and rewatch it at any time that you'd like. If you have any questions during today's webinar, go ahead and pop those into the chat. Casey and I will be circling back to those at the end for a Q&A portion of the webinar. So at any time you have any questions that come up, go ahead and type those and we'll get back to those at the end. Without further ado, Casey is the owner and president of Chief of Staff. He has been in the recruiting industry since 2006. And he's been the owner of Chief of Staff since 2019. So Casey, you want to go ahead and take it away?
All right, welcome everybody. As Kendall said, this is our first time doing this, so thanks for bearing with us. I was asked to talk about networking, so I'm going to go through some slides that Kendall's helped put together and give some tips and some pointers. Like I said, never done this before, so it's a learning experience. I'm used to more Q&A, but I don't want to just sit here and talk at all of you. So any questions you have, we're happy to answer them. But I guess let's go ahead and get started with the PowerPoint.
Sure. I switched computers. Give me just a second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
You're good. You're good. This is the first, but not the last. We will improve on all the technical issues. We promise that. Oh, your volume's off now, Kendall.
All right. Slides should be showing. Go ahead, Casey, take it away.
All right, can you click to the next slide? All right, so first thing we want to talk about is being authentic and being yourself. So authenticity is one of our core values here at Chief of Staff. And quite frankly, I think it's one of the most important values for everybody. If you're not yourself, people see through it. So don't try and be something that you're not. Stay true to who you are. If people don't like you, then move on. But find those who are going to gravitate towards you, who are going to click with you. You can't be everything to everyone. So be yourself. And if you're not, it's definitely going to show through. Next, Kendall. Be intentional about your networking. You know, I tell people all the time that I think Kansas City is one of the best cities on the planet for people genuinely wanting to help each other out. If you're looking for a job, if you need a referral, whatever it might be. But sometimes I think there's a caveat that I point out is that people don't want to step on toes. They don't want to offer suggestions, offer advice. They see that you've had a successful career, whatever it might be, and they don't want to just assume that you need their help. So be intentional with your networking. Go out there and make a point of saying, hey, I'm out here because I am looking to hire people. I am looking for a new job. I'm looking to just expand my personal network, whatever it is. But also, you've got to gain their trust. You know, I joined a club a few years ago. It's a networking club, for lack of better terms. But for about a year, I didn't tell anyone what I did unless they point blank asked me. You know, I was brought up in this industry to ask for the business. Hey, who you're looking to hire, or are you looking for a new job? What would you look for? And I feel like that comes across too eager, too aggressive. So take the time to get to know people and open up and gain their trust before you have the ask. But once you gain that trust, tell them what it is that you're there for. Are you just there to make connections? Do you have something more specific that you're looking for? So be intentional with it. Next slide. The rule of 7. So it says a prospect must see your advertisement 7 times before they establish name recognition. So we've all heard that before. It takes 7 times of meeting someone or being exposed to something before you really remember it. I think too often people think they have one introduction through some sort of a networking environment and like, hey, this is what I do. My name's XYZ and this is my job. And they find out 6 months, 12 months, 18 months later that someone used a competitor of theirs, a different service. Like, well, I met them and I really hit it off with them. Well, you had a 5-minute or 10-minute conversation with them. They may like you, but they're not going to remember who you are. So you need to have multiple exposure. or multiple different avenues. So if I meet somebody at a networking event, I almost always reach out via LinkedIn first thing, connect with them, say thanks a lot for your time. Really enjoyed meeting you and looking forward to our paths crossing again. Then maybe send an email, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, eight weeks later, depending on your relationship, maybe send them a text, maybe share a funny meme on social media or whatever it is. But you can't count on just 1 or 2 interactions of people really remembering who you are and what you're all about. I always tell people that 3 things make you memorable. It's your face, your name, and your story. I'll be honest, I'm usually good at 2 of them, but not all 3 of them. And it differs each time. Sometimes I'll hear a name and I've heard so much about that person that I know everything about them. I can tell you where they went to school, how many kids they have, where they grew up, where they currently live, where they work, etc. But I've maybe only met them one time and it was years ago, and people's appearances change. Maybe I didn't used to have a beard. Maybe people don't recognize me now that I've grown a beard, whatever it is. So it takes several different times of actually interacting with them before you can put all the pieces together. Next slide. All right, networking is for everyone. No matter your interests or field of work, there are networking groups for everyone. So I always think of networking as not just what you do, but it's who you are and how you live. Obviously, there's very formal networking groups. You're part of a construction company, there's construction networking groups, manufacturing, there's CFO groups. There's all these different, very specific groups, but I don't think it has to be that formal always. I like to joke around. It's like, people always ask me, how do I meet so many people? I meet my candidates, my clients, all these people that I'm interacting with. When I walk my dog, I don't have my earphones in. I say hello to my neighbors. When I get on a plane, I usually introduce myself to the person next to me. That's networking just as much as the formal networking. But also, any interest you have, I can almost guarantee you that there is a networking opportunity. Obviously, we've got Kansas City's a big sports town, so there's all sorts of different events you can go to: Chiefs games, Royals games, sporting, current, etc. You can get to know the groups surrounding you there. Plenty of people aren't sports fans though. There's the arts, there's book clubs, there's wine clubs, there's all sorts of different religious affiliations. There's community gardening groups. Anything you're interested in. You're into cycling. I've got a neighbor that just joined an electric scooter gang, which they go for rides on Tomahawk Creek Trail throughout town. Never in a million years did I realize there was going to be scooter gangs, quote unquote, but it's now a group of about 10 or 12 guys that he's got to be really close with. They've got some business interactions, but it's also social. But whatever you're into, I can promise you there's networking opportunities. And if they don't exist, go out there and create them. Next. Networking leads to growth. If you're networking, you're growing. My brother likes to make fun of me whenever he comes to town. He's like, which one of your best friends has a bachelor party tonight? Because he says my calendar's always busy every time he's in town from Minneapolis. He's somewhat being facetious, but your network doesn't have to replace other people. You're always expanding, always increasing the people that you know. I've got a text chain with about 12 guys that are friends of mine from kindergarten. I'm really close with them, but I'm meeting somebody new every single day too. And when I'm out there and I'm meeting new people, the first thing I think about is like, how can I help them out? Not who are they going to hire for me or where am I going to place them? But how can I better their lives and better our relationship? So I tell my team this all the time too. When you meet somebody, don't think of it as a transactional, like what's this going to lead to immediately, but think of what's our relationship going to look like 3, 4, 5 years from now. You never know what the future holds. I mean, none of us have a crystal ball. There's been multiple times where I thought this is going to be my last job ever. And for various reasons, move on to the next thing. But I think if you are closed-minded, you don't think you need to expand your network. There's all sorts of people that I have tried to reach out to do business with over the years that want to hire for me, and they don't have the time of day for me. But then all of a sudden they're in the market for a new job and they reach out and they're like, oh, I wish I would have answered your call 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. I look past that because I know that's how a lot of people's mentality is, but I think it could be a little bit short-sighted to think that you don't need to expand your network, whether it's a referral for someone to do your roof, whether it's someone you need to hire, whether it's someone you're going to go into business with and buy a company together. There's all sorts of different reasons to expand that network. And we talk about the black swan a lot of times in our office. And that's from a book that we read in our book club. The gist of the black swan is somebody said, hey, this is years ago, but there's no such thing as a black swan. And the other guy looks at him and said, well, how do you know there's not a black swan? He goes, well, I've never seen one before. He goes, well, just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Sure enough, he found a black swan the next day. So we talk about the black swan of how valuable it is to know that you don't know what you don't know. And by expanding your network, that you're always going to increase your possibility of having an ally in whatever aspect of life it is. Next. Who, what, where. Don't overlook the people right under your nose. I think sometimes people try and expand it too broad, but I always say, especially when it's in the job search process, think about those closest to you. You've already established that trust. Maybe you guys don't have a professional relationship yet, but the trust is probably the biggest issue, the biggest hurdle to overcome when you are looking for a new job. So talk to the parents of your kids' teammates, their classmates, your neighbors. There's so many people that we know socially that we don't really have any clue what they do professionally. The pandemic was a very good example of that for myself. I've lived in the same house for over 11 years. And when the pandemic first started, I was craving social interaction. One of my good friends, a neighbor of mine, lives down the street. He's like, what are we supposed to do? This time of day, we're usually at a happy hour. And so he parked his truck on the end of my driveway, and we put a fire pit out front and respectfully socially distanced and enjoyed a whiskey together. Well, that led to the next day and the next day and the next day. And before you know it, all of our neighbors are sitting around the driveway, sitting around the fire. And these are people that I've seen in passing and waved to a million times, but I didn't really get to know them until that. And it took the pandemic and the shutdown before I really had the opportunity to get to know them. So don't look past the people that are already in your network and try and get more out of it however you can, whether it's old classmates, people you go to church with, etc. There's a story I tell frequently. I had a client reach out to me a couple of years ago, and he was looking to hire. And he tells me what he's looking for. He's like, do you think you have any good candidates for that? I said, yeah, based on what you're telling me about, I'm pretty sure I've had some good options for you. So the first guy I call, I tell him about the job. He says, sounds really interesting. Well, they happen to start at the same public accounting firm a year apart, about 15, 20 years prior to this conversation. I said, I think there's a chance you know this guy. And he goes, okay, try me. And I tell him, and he starts laughing. And I said, well, is that a good laugh or a bad laugh? He goes, it's a good laugh. He's one of my best friends. We go golfing together twice a week. I said, oh, well, is it too close for comfort, or would you go work for this guy? It's like, I'd love to work for him. Quite frankly, I'm kind of surprised he didn't mention the job to me. Well, then I reached back out to the hiring manager. I said, I think I've got a really good candidate for you. It's like, okay. And I tell him about him. I go, I think you know him. And he goes, oh my gosh. He goes, he'd come work for me? I said, he'd love to. And he just assumed that the compensation piece was going to work out because they started their careers about the same time. And some people's trajectories are faster than others. And it was a match made in heaven. They could have golfed together 1,000 more times, and he wouldn't have reached out to him about this job because he didn't want to offend him. He didn't want to presume anything. So it took me to connect them, I'm saying in air quotes, even though they're already good friends. So don't forget to look beneath your nose. I've actually placed people with their aunts and uncles before. I've placed people with neighbors, friends, all across the board, because sometimes people look too far out on the horizon and not just right there at their fingertips. Next. Step out of your comfort zone. So don't alienate lifelong friends, neighbors, teammates, etc. But go out of your way to make friends with a new group. I give an example a lot. We've got some guys on the team that have gotten really into golf recently. Big avid golfers, a few years into their golf journey. And one of our guys in particular plays, he's got a standing match. I think it's every Friday afternoon with some of his high school buddies. And a few months ago, someone reached out to him. It was a potential client of ours, and asked him to go golf. And he's like, oh, I'd love to, but I've already got a golf round scheduled. I'm not saying turn your back on your close friends, et cetera. They're going to be there for you, though. So find opportunities to get out there and do the same things that you love, but with a broader group. And then ultimately you might mesh those groups together. You might join them. So try, like, I get asked to go to a lot of sporting events. I get asked to go to Royals games and Chiefs games, a lot of friends. And, you got to make time for those who have been around for forever. And like I said, don't turn your back on them. But when I have an opportunity to expand that network, a lot of times I'm going to go with the person I don't know as well. I think it's very easy for people to fall into the trap of, yeah, this is a comfort zone. These are our closest friends. They asked us to go to dinner. It's not that challenging. But then you're not expanding yourself either. Sometimes to put yourself in a spot where you got to get to know these people, and it might be a little bit more uncomfortable at first, but once you take that first step and go and meet with them and go to a game or go golf or go to a restaurant with them, all of a sudden you have a whole new group of contacts that can come in valuable many different ways. And also, it says try networking with people you don't have much in common with. You'll find similarities. Somebody told me one time, and I'm not quite sure if it was intended to be a compliment or not, but quite frankly, I took it as a compliment, is every time I walk in a room, I gravitate to the person the least like me. I think variety is the spice of life. I think it keeps it interesting. I've got friends that are 20 years old. I've got friends that are 80 years old. I've got friends from all different makes, models, socioeconomic status, countries of origin, etc. And again, it's easy to just network and hang out with the people the most similar to you. You live in the same neighborhood, you have a similar job, your kids are the same age, you guys are the same age. That's easy. And you can always fall back on that. But challenge yourself to get out there and talk to somebody that is very different than you. And there's a million different ways that you're different. But I think once you start talking to people, you'll realize you have more similarities than differences. My wife and I love to travel. We've been all over the country and many international trips too. And there's so many differences on the surface, but once you get to know people, we have a lot more similarities than you might believe at first. So step out of your comfort zone as much as you can. Vulnerability. Everyone has a story to tell. Vulnerability is something that I feel like I'm good at. I know not everybody is. Sometimes I'm an oversharer. Early on in my career, I was always told to keep personal and professional totally separate. I don't necessarily believe that. I mean, we've got over 200 clients here in town that we work with. I consider every single one of them a friend, but it's because I'm true with them. I'm real with them. I've got a story. We've all lost loved ones. I lost my mom in high school, and a lot of times people are uncomfortable to talk about things like that, or like that's too open. Well, quite frankly, it's a huge part of my story. Without that, I don't know what trajectory my life would have taken. So I think a lot of times people are afraid of oversharing because they think it's not professional or whatever. And of course, there's different settings. I'm not saying share your whole life story in a first interview or at a business meeting, but figure out the time that you can open up and really be yourself, because everyone has a story to tell. And a lot of times you'll learn that you have more in common. And sometimes it's tragedies, but it's going to bond you. There's going to be something about your life story that people can relate to. We've all had difficult times to overcome, but be open, be yourself, be transparent. And then back to going out of your way to talk to people you normally wouldn't. Like it's so valuable to really step outside of the comfort zone. And I think being vulnerable is stepping outside of the comfort zone, but I think you'll see it pays dividends if you just open up and be transparent. There's so many times I've talked to somebody in an interview setting and I say, hey, why'd you leave the job or what happened? And they try and skirt around it and not really, say the real reason why they left or whatever. I'm like, we've all found ourselves in tough situations. Be transparent with me about it and I can help you. I can help you find the best way to tell the story. And a lot of times what people realize is the difficult time they went through dealing with a tough boss, dealing with a company that was going out of business or whatever. It makes them more relatable because most other people have been in similar situations too. So in conclusion, I would say find what works for you. It's not the same for everybody. Some people feel better in a big crowd where they almost like speed dating, where they meet a whole bunch of different people and it's not too intimate of a setting. It's, it's a whole bunch of different introductions and you can kind of blend into the crowd more. Maybe you go with a group. It's like a group date, a double date. I think that's a good way to meet a lot of people, but it's hard to really peel back that onion and get to know them well. Other people like really small groups. I mean, networking can literally mean a one-on-one meeting. It doesn't have to be that formal. It can be all sorts of different avenues, but you got to find what works for you. So like I said, I think networking is more of a lifestyle. It's not this contrived, I have every Thursday morning this standing, networking event. those are fine too. But networking can be asking your neighbor to go for a walk, you know, and you're talking about your life issues, some personal, some professional, whatever else. It's, you know, when you go to church, whenever you go to your religious, um, you know, different events, you can meet up afterwards. There's usually coffee and donuts or whatever. Sometimes I'm tired. I just want to get home and watch the football game or whatever, but take 15, 20 minutes to sit down with the people. You see them every week or however often it is, but you see them in a very, you know, small in passing setting versus like an intimate where you get to know them. You know, I referenced the bonfire earlier. You know, these are neighbors that literally I lived by for almost a decade that I knew only from a wave in the car, and that was it. I live in a cul-de-sac. You'd think we know each other intimately well, but it really took the pandemic, the global pandemic, to you know, it was like moths to a fire. We put the bonfire and everyone started coming. The first guy that came, I didn't even know his first name. I knew, and he's like, "Hey, I've got a bunch of extra firewood. Would you mind if I drop some off for you?" I was like, "Absolutely," and pull up a chair. And next thing you know, we're close friends and we've done business together now too. So networking is every different aspect of life. It's really just being open and being receptive to learning new people, learning about new cultures, learning new things, and finding whatever avenue works best for you. So sorry for the original technical difficulties. I promise we'll get better with this, but I think we're on to the Q&A session now. So I don't know if the timing was right, but Kendall, you want to take it over from here?
Yeah, great. Awesome, Casey. I think real quick before we start asking some questions, when Casey and I were finalizing everything yesterday, listening to him talk, one of the biggest things that I took away from hearing Casey talk about all of this was networking doesn't have to be something formal, right, Casey? It's literally everywhere. It's all around you. And yeah, I think that was my favorite thing that you've touched on. But we have a question from Briley. She said, "What are your go-to conversation starters for networking with brand new people?"
Okay, so this isn't contrived, but I've found that it works. I joke around. It's like I mentioned that we're a sports town. So a lot of people love to talk about sports. People like to talk about family, and people like to talk about travel. But that's not everybody. So then I even have like subcategories. So maybe it's a single person without a big family or kids or whatever. I'm like, all right, well, let's talk about pets. There's a good chance you have pets. That's like a subcategory of family. All right, you're not a big sports fan. That's fine. You know, I'm a big sports fan, but I like other stuff too. So let's talk about the arts. What's the most recent concert you've been to? What's your favorite museum? Who's your favorite artist? And so I kind of go on down from there. You can relate with those 5 or 6 categories I just mentioned with about 99% of the world, honestly.
Casey, while other people are thinking of questions to answer or ask in the chat, I have one for you. What are some unique approaches that you've used to make initial connections, that first connection, feel more authentic rather than transactional?
I'd go back to the vulnerability on that. You know, it's people want to hear my story, and I always joke around. I'm like, "Hey, I'm long-winded," and I said, "How abbreviated of a version do you want?" And they're like, "Take me back to the beginning." And so I just lay it all out. I talk about the highs, the lows throughout life, both personally and professionally. And like I said, every single person has highs and lows in life. And I think sometimes people come out, it's like it's all roses and sunshine and everything's great. It was like, no, not everything always is great. And so it's just being vulnerable and being transparent about who I am. And I think that makes people gravitate to you more and more relatable than everything's perfect and there's never anything going wrong. So.
Definitely. We have another question. This one's from Owen. He says, "Are there any common mistakes people make to avoid while networking?"
Um, I think trying to be everything to everyone. Like I said, you're going to find people you click with, and that doesn't mean it's the exact same demographic as you. But I think sometimes people come across inauthentic because they want to cater to everybody, and then you're like an inch deep and a mile wide, and so really find what you're going to click with and dive into that. And I think it can come across inauthentic if people try and be too much to everybody.
Definitely agreed. Okay, so Luke says, "Any networking advice for introverts?" That's a good one.
Yeah, obviously I'm not an introvert, so that makes it a little harder because that's not the way I grew up. But back to find your passion. You know, find whatever it is. It can I would say introverts are going to be better in a smaller setting, like a few person book club, whatever it is, if a group to work out with, a church group, like something, a Bible study, whatever it is. Like I think a smaller group, because I go to networking events that are 200-300 people, and it's a little overwhelming, and it's probably not going to be the best for an introvert. But really hone in on whatever you're the most passionate about and try and find like-minded. And truthfully, I think your personality type will lend itself to whatever that is. So you probably have some pretty like-minded people that you're going to click with more naturally. Hopefully that
Great.
helps.
Yeah. Thanks, Luke, for that question. We've got another one from Dan. So he has two questions. First question, after an initial coffee or lunch, what are the best ways to remain in touch while respecting other people's time? Go ahead and answer that one first, and then we'll come back for the second part.
Well, I think point blank asking sometimes. There's a lot of times I'll interview a job seeker, and they'll ask that exact question. And they're like, hey, is it okay if I call once a week to touch base to see if you have any updates? And my response to that is, I'm never discouraging anyone from reaching out to me. You can call, text, email, LinkedIn message, however you want to contact me. I'm not always going to be available, but I do say, hey, if you're calling me, we're talking 10, 15, 20 minutes to catch up. That's cutting into the time that I'm spending to try and find you a new job. And trust me, if I have an update, I'm going to give you an update. Now, I know people like, the contact for the peace of mind, but I think just asking people what their preference is. Some people don't want to be texted for whatever reason. I don't mind that at all. So I think once you finish, like, hey, what's the best way to stay in touch? And people will be honest with you, and they'll tell you what the best method is for staying in touch.
Great. You kind of touched on this too, Casey, but what frequency would you advise for reaching out? How
Again, I
often?
think you have to rely on the person that you talk to. I don't think that's scientific. My first job in this business, I remember we had these rules of engagement. Basically, you had to talk to your candidate, once every 2 weeks, and your client once every 2 months, or they're fair game. And that just felt so transactional to me. Talk to someone and it's day 61 and someone else is calling them and trying to get their business. I've got clients that I have had great relationships with for years. And if I'm just touching base, just to touch base, like, hey, we're both busy. What do you want? It's like, I know once every 8, 9, 10 months, they're going to have a need for me. They're going to reach out. We've got that relationship established. I'm not bothering them, just take time. There's others that want a little more hand holding, for lack of better words, where they want some more frequent interaction. So I think you really need to rely on talking to the person and asking their opinion of it.
Great. Yeah. We got one more from Nicole. She says, what are some of the biggest differences between in-person networking and virtual networking? Which method works best?
I'm old school. I mean, in person all the time. It's funny because obviously we did a lot of the virtual stuff like we're doing today at the beginning of the pandemic. And I was on the daily Zoom happy hours with people and, Zoom meetings and whatever. And it's funny, with the world is shrinking. It's becoming smaller and smaller with social media and all the other avenues to connect. And I run into people every single week to this day where they'll look at me like, Casey, and I'm like, yeah, I know you. And they're like, I think we met one time. I was like, when? Like, it was via Zoom. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. It's just different than in person. So I like to shake a hand and look people in the eyes. I mean, for some people it works, and in certain industries, they've been doing all sorts of virtual interactions for years and years. The tech industry is very notable for that. It's just being in person, sitting across from the desk or the coffee table or whatever it is. I'm going to choose that 100 times out of 100. But there is value. Obviously, we're doing this today with the webinar, so it's easier to reach a broader audience doing things like this. And due to things like pandemics and whatever, it's not always feasible or geographic locations. So I think in-person's best. I think a virtual like this is better than a phone call, and then phone call last, but there's ways to make it work at every different path.
Awesome. Sean says, no questions. Great stuff, Casey and COS team.
Thanks, Sean.
And then Morgan, she says, how can I find local networking events? Where would you recommend to look? That's a good one.
Um, a lot of it's word of mouth, honestly, and just talking to people and asking, hey, how'd you get involved in this or whatever? And again, it's identifying your passion. Hey, maybe you love puzzles, whatever it is, and then reaching out. I mean, I show my age. Everybody in the office likes to make fun of my technical deficiencies, but I know there's message boards. There's all sorts of different forums you can go online. I mean, Google is a powerful tool. I think you just look it up. But again, it's finding somebody that's like-minded to you and asking, hey, how'd you get involved in this? And at the end of the day, you can always create your own.
Awesome. Thanks, Morgan, for that question. Travis, not a question, but he says, thanks, Casey. This was great insight. That's
You're
awesome.
welcome. Thank you, Travis.
I've got a question. So, what's a common challenge that you face, Casey, while networking, and how do you personally overcome it?
Um, Remembering sometimes, I've met a lot of people, and like I said, the three things I think make people memorable are their face, their story, and their name. And it's hard sometimes putting all those together, especially with the global pandemic when we did meet people virtually and stuff. I think that makes it a little challenging. So I've got tricks to help remind myself of who people are, and I try and be a diligent note taker to remember. But I always try to remember something very specific about a person that makes them memorable, whether it's a physical appearance, whether it's a element of their story, it's a unique name or something, and then I try and make correlations with that and something else to help me, just little mind tricks to remember them. But you'll go out in public, and I was at an event last Friday, and I see this lady, and I'm like, gosh, I know her, and I met her a couple of years ago at an event, and she came up and reintroduced herself. But sometimes it's just finding the best ways to remember who all you meet, and making the connections of how you know them.
That's good stuff. What's a creative way that you've helped or added value to somebody that's in your network?
Creative way. We say that our motto is we make connections that matter for work, and I really believe that. I joke around a lot of times that 98% of what we do is pro bono work, but that leads to the 2% that pays the bills. But it's just always being a value add, however we can. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had several clients reach out to us that were really struggling to get their PPP loans taken care of, and they weren't happy with their bankers. We started making introductions to friends of ours that are in banking, and it helped them out a lot. I've had, I think, 3 different people in my neighborhood reach out because they were looking to move and asked if I had someone that wanted to buy their house. So I'm not a realtor, but I got to choose my next door neighbors. They're good friends of mine, have been for years, and I've helped a couple other people buy houses in our neighborhood. So it's just creative ways. This is a more somber one, but I got a call from a neighbor last year who I'd met one time. He was new to town, and he said, "Hey, someone mentioned that you know everybody in town. I need your advice on something." I was like, "Okay, what is it?" He goes, "You have the name of a good divorce attorney." I'm like, "Well, I wish this wasn't why you were reaching out. I personally haven't used one, but yeah, I know some people." So just being a value add however you can. And again, I think when I meet with people, I immediately think of, who's going to be a valuable connection for them? Not because they're looking for a job, not because they're looking to hire, but who's going to get along well. These people have something unique about their background, and they're going to gravitate towards each other. And so, like, I'm always like, who can I connect, and not for an agenda, but just because I think it's going to be a genuine good connection.
Definitely. Casey, I've got one more question for you. It looks like the chat's kind of come to a lull, but I've got one more, and then I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. But how do you handle networking situations where you feel overwhelmed or don't know anyone?
It can be overwhelming. I mean, obviously, I do it a lot, so I'm probably better suited for it than some. But there's absolutely situations where I feel overwhelmed. Um, Take a deep breath, be confident in yourself, go find someone and introduce yourself. Like I said, I always try and gravitate to the person. Well, I don't want to say I try. I think I naturally gravitate to the people that are least like me because that's the most interesting. Like I said, variety is the spice of life. So if it's all 20, 30, 40 people, this one demographic, go talk to somebody else. It keeps it interesting. And again, go in there with a vulnerability, be willing to share your own personal story, and you'll get people to open up to you as well. And again, try and add value to them however you can. It's not necessarily about looking for a job or looking to hire, but whatever it might be, and go in there and listen too. I think salespeople talk too much, and I talk too much. I get it, but the best people to interact with are those who listen too. And so go in there and don't just try and tell your story, but hear what they're saying as well.
Definitely. Well, we don't have any more questions in the chat. I think I'm all good. But Casey, thank you so much for your insight. I think it's really important to have these kinds of conversations for people to be able to hear it, straight from your mouth instead of just on LinkedIn posts or reading a book. I think there's something about that human connection, seeing someone talk about the things that they care about. You obviously care about people. And so I think this was really, really great. Thank you, everyone who attended and asked your questions. Hopefully there was at least one thing that you took out of this, but I think Casey's wealth of knowledge was pretty great today. But Casey, any last words from you?
No, I was say anybody wants to reach out anytime, questions about this or anything else, always happy to help. So again, I apologize about our early on technical difficulties. We'll shore that up for the future, but hopefully everybody enjoyed and found some value in this. And like I said, it's our first time, so it only goes up from here. But I appreciate everybody tuning in and step out of your comfort zone and go make a new connection.
That's right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, guys. Take care.